Forbidden medicine, cures that break business models. Energy is the invoice you see. Medicine is the invoice you live. The system runs on returns, follow-ups, refills, routine. Anything that ends the routine threatens the rent. So the cures arrive like contraband, older than antibiotics, sharper than chemo, and engineered to be one and done. Start with precision hunters that predate penicillin. In 1923, clinicians in Tbilisi used bacteriophages, viruses that kill bacteria and then vanish, to clear infections nobody could medicate. A century later, the biology is stronger and the paperwork heavier. A girl in 2017 ran out of antibiotics after a surgical infection learned new tricks. A clinician matched her strain against a freezer library, blended 3 phages, and shipped a vial. 2 days after infusion, the smell of the wound changed before the labs did. Insurance reimbursed nothing. The chart read, improvement coincident with therapy. The family framed the empty bottle. Here's the mismatch. Regulators approve a fixed drug with a single label. Phages are libraries that adapt. Every cocktail update looks like a new product on paper, even when it's the same process in practice. Hospitals hide behind vendor lists with no column for tailored virus. Companies patent manufacturing and delivery, then meet a clock, burn rate versus guidance that doesn't fit. A gleaming facility opened in 2019 promising overnight matching. An agency asked for comparability data on updates. Weeks became quarters. A strategic investor bought control, pivoted to adjacent indications, and parked the rest. The stakes aren't academic. Antibiotic resistance isn't a graph, it's a bed number. When drugs fail, phages can chase a moving target in hours and replicate at the infection site. They're not perfect, they're fast, but speed doesn't map to codes. Reimbursement wants phase 3 trials with identical bottles and long horizons. Families write their own logistics. Swabs to Georgia, couriers across borders, consent forms taller than the patient. Then diagnostics that move disease left on the timeline. Not sci-fi tricorders, quiet carts and tubes. Liquid biopsies read tiny shards of tumor DNA in blood. Methylation maps guess tissue of origin with probabilities that sharpen as datasets grow. Breath analyzers pick volatile organic compound patterns linked to cancer or fibrosis on benches that used to live only in gas chromatography labs. In 2021, a high-risk smoker in a regional pilot blew a pattern that annoyed a nurse practitioner enough to push for imaging. The scan found a nodule the size of a pea, surgery instead of cycles. She went home Monday. A chemo chair stayed empty for winters. Hospitals can do the math. Late-stage care pays for wings, early-stage cures empty rooms. Procurement asks payers for coverage. Payers want decade outcomes. Decade outcomes require deployment now. Risk committees ask who owns false positives. It asks where the data lives. GPOs ask if the analyzer is on their list. A pilot ends with cake and a press photo. The cart goes back in a box. Everyone says promising. The calendar says no. Now the one and dones. A sickle cell patient who lived inside ER hallways for years got a CRISPR edit in 2023. Pain crises faded into memory he didn't trust at first. Then billing began. How do you price never again in a system built to average risk across quarters? Manufacturers offer outcomes guarantees. Employers balk because people switch jobs. Medicaid wants miracles at a price that funds none. The clinic waits for authorization. The patient waits for Friday to feel like Friday. Cell therapies try to dodge bespoke traps. Off-the-shelf natural killer cells trained to hunt universal signals aim for repeatable manufacturing. Early solid tumor cohorts show durable responses in small numbers. Choke points move to capacity and IP. A method patent claims adequate persistence, then adequacy becomes a courtroom word. Trials pause pending supply harmonization. Patients track news like weather. Printed organs hover between bench and bedside. Bioprinters lay down bioinks, cells on scaffolds with growth factors, to mimic tissues that pass preclinical tests. Livers detox in animals, hearts beat in scaffolds, kidneys show filtration surrogates. Regulators reasonably want potency assays that predict human outcomes, matched lots, long surveillance. Committees form. Frameworks lag. A child on a list hears "not yet" from a device that exists in a chilled box 60 feet away. Closed-loop devices cut a different rent, disposables and data. A glucose implant with multi-month life talks to a pump that learns. Code becomes the business model. A firm merges, forces cloud logins, and deprecates offline mode for safety. A small clinic runs open firmware, loses parts support, and watches patients who finally sleep through the night choose between privacy and updates. Across all of it, the language is gentle and the effect is hard. Insufficient evidence. Experimental. Pathway unclear. Truth, some claims won't hold. Caution matters. Also truth, evidence takes time you only get by using the thing. When the thing ends a revenue stream, time runs slower. Still, cracks widen. A military hospital publishes a Phage case series. A state Medicaid pilot covers multi-cancer blood screens for narrow groups with navigation baked in. A co-op of employers pools risk for gene edits and lets coverage travel with the patient for 5 years, so switching jobs stops killing authorizations. An outcomes registry goes public by default. Smears have to argue with receipts, not rumors. One micro story to hold. A man with a printed scaffold in his spine lifts his daughter and waits for the bolt of pain that trained him to flinch. Nothing. He laughs in a kitchen that's heard the other sound for years. An email arrives. Program paused pending supplier changes. He sets his phone down and keeps laughing anyway. That's the threat. Not flashy immortality, quiet ends to bills that were never meant to end. Precision pathogens. Phage Therapy's return and retreat. The chart read like a countdown. Fever up, creatinine creeping, cultures blooming the wrong names. On day 8, the pharmacist said the thing people whisper when the cabinet's empty. There's a lab in Tbilisi that can match phages. The attending raised an eyebrow. The family didn't. A swab left on ice. To understand why that call matters, we need to go back a century. In the 1920s and 1930s, clinicians in Georgia and Poland used bacteriophages, viruses that hunt specific bacteria, to clear infections before penicillin made one-size pills the business model. It wasn't magic, it was matchmaking. You isolate the patient's strain, test a library, blend a cocktail, and deliver bullets that replicate at the infection site and vanish when the target is gone. It's fast, personal, and stubbornly hard to fit into a system built for identical bottles with barcodes. Stakes first, antibiotic resistance isn't a headline, it's a bed number. When the last resort fails, you don't need a perfect drug, you need something that can outrun a microbe that just outran a century of chemistry. Phages can. They adapt on the same timescale as the bacteria. That speed is the cure. It's also the paperwork problem. The vial arrived 4 days after the swab. In a basement pharmacy, a tech checked titers, a nurse read a consent form that felt like a novella, and a clear bag started to drip. The first clue wasn't a lab value. It was the smell. Wounds have a vocabulary. This one lost its worst word overnight. 48 hours later, CRP broke, fever bent, and a tired mother slept in a chair for the first time in a week. The progress note was careful. Clinical improvement coincident with phage therapy. Insurance reimbursed nothing. The bottle went home empty and got a place on a shelf. What nobody outside the hallway saw was how quickly the retreat began. The next patient's strain didn't match the lab's library. Importing new phages would trigger a review that could take weeks. An IRB wanted protocol language that didn't exist yet. Pharmacy needed a vendor ID for a supplier that wasn't on any list. The hospital attorney asked who held liability if a virus updated mid-course. Reasonable questions, lethal timing. Manufacturing sat at the heart of the mismatch. You can't patent a virus found in a river, but you can patent how you purify it, package it, and maintain your library. Companies raised rounds on platforms, make, match, ship overnight, and ran into a framework built for fixed products. Every cocktail update looked on paper like a new drug. In 2019, a gleaming facility opened with gowns that whispered and stainless steel that gleamed. An email from regulators asked for comparability data on updates. Weeks turned to quarters. Burn rates don't care about guidance documents. A strategic investor bought control and pivoted to adjacent indications. The library stayed cold. Clinicians hacked where they could. Compassionate use letters stacked. Sample tubes left for research when vendor lists said no. Families built group chats with couriers, phone numbers, and time zones. A military hospital published a small case series, multi-drug resistant wound infections that finally cooled, and a congressional staffer waved the paper at a hearing. Agencies murmured about platform approvals and master files for phage libraries. The murmur moved slower than sepsis. Then the smear cycle. Hype outpaces evidence. The body of the article was careful, heterogeneous cases, variable manufacturing, small n, but the headline did the work. Committees took the safest path, wait for Phase 3. Phase 3 requires standardization phages don't respect and inclusion criteria made of edge cases. Patients learned a new phrase for not now. Meanwhile, the science didn't stop. Labs built faster assays to test lytic spectra. QA teams shortened sterility checks with validated rapid methods. A university ran a registry that turned anecdotes into time-stamped outcomes. Organism, susceptibility, cocktail, dose, day-by-day labs. Transparency blunted rumor. Procurement still asked for codes. Payers wanted randomized mortality data. Mortality data needed time no one had. Micro-stories carried the weight. In a burn unit, irrigation with a matched cocktail lifted a biofilm like wet paint. A surgical resident took a photo, labeled it education, and never put it on a slide. In a long-term care facility, a woman with a stubborn urinary infection stopped cycling antibiotics after a pocket nebulizer delivered a phage blend on Fridays. A compliance officer asked where the invoices should go. There weren't any. Limits are real. Bacteria evolve, phages can select resistance. Immunogenicity matters, endotoxin limits are unforgiving, titers drop on the shelf, timelines slip when flights do. But those are engineering problems. They bend with use. What bends slower is permission. Frameworks that approve processes instead of molecules exist for cell and gene therapies, but they're expensive roads with tolls in lawyers and time. Impact shows up where optics don't reach. A regional network wrote a playbook. When the ID team hits the wall, pull a lab's library under a research umbrella, log every variable to a public registry, and let the outcomes argue with the labels. A state pilot funded matching for last resort cases with coverage tied to the registry, not a press release. A small manufacturer published their SOPs under a permissive license and dared copycats. Instead of a lawsuit, they got a purchase order. The last moments stay human. A teenager who'd stopped planning weekends watched a bag drip while a nurse checked a phone for an email that would say whether the next vial could legally land. The fever line bent. The email didn't. She went home anyway with follow-ups and a list of numbers that looked like a smuggler's ledger. The therapy didn't fit the system. It fit her. And that's why the system stalled. Early detection that ends entire markets. The machines didn't promise immortality. They promised to move bad news left months or years earlier, where surgery beats drips and bills get smaller instead of larger. That shift sounds clinical until you sit in the room where budgets live. Early detection doesn't just save lives, it erases revenue forecasts built on late-stage care. Start with blood, 2 tubes, spun down and read like a whisper. Circulating tumor DNA is confetti from dying cells, too sparse for old tools but legible when sequencers and methylation maps do the translation. In 2021, a union employer in the Midwest piloted multi-cancer screening for high-risk members. A woman flagged pancreas-like at low probability. Standard imaging shrugged. A careful follow-up found a pea-sized lesion tucked in a spot most scans ignore. Friday morning, a surgeon worked quietly. Monday, she went home. 3 winters passed without a chair. Stakes are simple. Catch at stage I and chemo lines empty. That emptiness echoes infusion staffing, pharmacy revenue, imaging cadence, bed turnover. A hospital's CFO can read that tide and feel their capital plan wobble. So procurement asks payers for coverage codes. Payers ask for decade-long mortality data. Mortality data requires deploying now. Risk management asks who owns false positives. Legal asks where custody sits. It asks which cloud owns the raw. Everyone nods. The cart waits on a loading dock. Breath looked like folklore until arrays and models made patterns honest. Disease changes metabolism. Metabolism changes volatile organic compounds. Exhale carries the signature. In 2022, a safety net system rolled a breath cart next to low-dose CT for heavy smokers. 1,000 tests, a dozen subtle signals, and surgeons with quiet grins. Finance wanted payer commitments. Payers said experimental. The manufacturer offered a lease. The group purchasing organization didn't list the vendor. The analyzer left with a thank you sheet cake and a promise to evaluate next budget cycle. Limits are real. Blood screens raise false alarms, breath varies with diet, meds, humidity, but engineering curves bend. Panels add context, thresholds adapt, confirmatory pathways tight. The bigger fight isn't sensitivity, it's incentives. A device that compresses downstream care doesn't belong to the side of the house that gets paid by the hour. A micro story hits harder than any chart. A county clinic served firefighters after a brutal season. A donor covered a year of breath tests tied to swift imaging when the signal insisted. Month 1, a captain who'd skipped scans for years blew a pattern a nurse couldn't ignore. The nodule was small enough to cut before it could bill a decade. He called his crew from recovery. They showed up on a day off and stared at the cart like it was a person. When the grant ended, 3 payers wrote no, 2 wrote appeal, and no one wrote a check. Blood labs ran into codes, the quiet turnstiles of American medicine. To get paid, you need a CPT code with a policy, and policies want trials whose ethics go sideways once you know early is better. A national lab chain tried an opt-in methylation screen in 2023 through employers. Uptake climbed until an insurer sent a concern memo about unproven utility. The toggle moved behind a request button most people never find. Numbers dipped. Headlines never ran. Hospitals that tried anyway learned to hide success in the right ledger. One integrated system built a prevention bundle, blood screen plus navigation for their own staff, then for a city contract. Stage shifts appeared, surgical theater booked more mornings, chemo chairs sat emptier. The CFO quarantined results in a value-based silo so fee-for-service lines didn't set the policy. The silos barely spoke. The program survived on stubbornness and a union steward who refused to sit down. Vendors found themselves fighting ghosts. A breath device lives best with data on-prem, fast, private, resilient. It insisted on cloud analytics for observability. The hospital's legal team asked for audit logs and deletion schedules. The device answered, local storage rotating. The meeting paused. The device went back to a crate while committees waited for a safer phrasing of the same truth. You don't need the cloud to smell trouble. The smear cycle arrived right on schedule. Overpromising blood tests mislead patients. Some claims deserved the hammer. One dead unicorn had poisoned half the well. But careful screens with peer-reviewed panels got tarred by adjacency. Finance chiefs forwarded the headline to committees looking for reasons to sit still. Manufacturers countered with white papers and comparative studies. The safest decision stayed the slowest one. Workarounds multiplied where people were tired of funerals. Self-insured employers wrote coverage with navigation baked in and agreed to pay only when signals led to validated findings. A state Medicaid pilot funded breath for specific groups with smoking histories and paired it with nurse-driven follow-up. Outcomes slid into public dashboards, arguments turned into data. A radiology chair went from skeptic to quiet champion after a month of nodules that used to arrive 2 years too late. The human beats kept pace with the spreadsheets. A machinist whose father died at 58 blew a breath test at 53, complained about nothing, and found a shadow that hadn't learned to spread. He missed 1 week of work and returned to a job that never budgeted for a drip. An oncology nurse sat in a half-empty suite on a Tuesday and didn't know whether to feel pride or panic. She chose pride and applied to supervise navigation. What nobody knew at the time, a small city wrote an RFP for local-first diagnostics that banned forced clouds and required public outcomes reporting. Vendors with dashboards balked. A quiet firm that made carts with no monthly fee won the bid, installed in 2 clinics and published stage shifts quarterly. The press didn't care. Patients did. Early detection isn't a gadget war. It's a timeline war. Move disease left and everything on the right loses gravity. The people who sit on that side aren't villains. They're bound to budgets built on yesterday. The cure for that isn't slogans. It's receipts that show fewer funerals and a procurement clause that refuses to rent the privilege of catching trouble in time. Regenerative one-and-dones, repairs instead of refills. The idea sounded simple enough to make enemies. Repair once, then stop paying. In clinics and quiet labs, 3 fronts pushed that promise from posters into rooms. Gene edits that end inherited pain, off-the-shelf immune cells that hunt without bespoke kitchens, and printed scaffolds that teach tissue how to finish the job. Stakes first, healthcare budgets live on rhythm, visits, refills, follow-ups, complications. A therapy that cancels the calendar isn't just medicine, it's a wrecking ball through receivables. That truth didn't arrive in a memo. It arrived in a chair where a teenager sat with a pen he'd forgotten how to hold without bracing for a shock. Action began in a glass room with quiet air. In 2023, a young man with sickle cell took a single dose that carried a correction to the punctuation error embedded in his blood since birth. Weeks later, the pain crises that taught him to count hospital ceilings didn't show. He kept waiting for the old pattern. It didn't come. His nurse cried before his mother did. Then the billing started. The price looked like a house. The manufacturer offered outcomes guarantees. The plan sponsor wanted decade horizons while members switched jobs yearly. A case manager whispered, "We're trying," and the word hung like a string over a canyon. Meanwhile, off-the-shelf natural killer cells sidestepped the custom trap. Instead of farming a patient's own T cells and hoping they cooperated, engineers trained NK cells in vats to spot stress signals tumors can't hide forever. Doses standardized. Logistics simplified. Early solid tumor cohorts saw responses that didn't read like wishful thinking. Capacity became the choke point, then IP. A facility bottleneck turned into a method patent argument over persistence adequate for durable effect. Adequate moved from bench to courtroom. Trials paused, pending harmonization. Patients who'd shaved their heads in hope refreshed inboxes. Printed scaffolds told a quieter story in orthopedics and organs.